Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of smartphones.
Okay.
We've got some excerpts here from the Wikipedia article on smartphones.
Right.
And we're going to kind of see if we can't figure out how these things went from, kind of niche gadgets to like practically an extension of ourselves.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, I think, now that we've got, the world at our fingertips, how we even got here.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a straight line from those like clunky early phones to what we have now.
No, not at all. I remember like carrying around separate devices for everything.
Right.
Like you had your PDA, you had your digital camera, you had your like big chunky cell phone. It's like wild to think how we've crammed all that into these like sleek little rectangles we carry around now.
It really is. It speaks to, both the miniaturization of technology, I think, and our like desire to just have it all, instantly accessible.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that the like very first smartphone, if you can even call it that,
Yep.
actually debuted way back in 1994. The IBM Simon.
The IBM Simon. See, now that one I'm not familiar with. What made it a smartphone?
I mean, it was clunky.
Okay.
And it was like a commercial flop, but it was a glimpse into the future. It had a touch screen. It had email capabilities. It even had like apps, like a calendar and a world clock.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine pulling that out in 1994?
Right. People would have thought it was like magic or something.
Totally.
But I'm guessing it also had that like classic 90s tech clunkiness.
Oh, yeah.
Like what were its shortcomings?
Well, I mean, battery life was a major, major issue. I mean, this is the era of like nickel cadmium batteries,
Yeah.
And then the touchscreen technology itself was just like in its infancy, right? It wasn't the like intuitive, responsive experience that we're used to now.
So while like, the West is trying to figure out this whole smartphone thing, what's going on in the East? Japan specifically. Weren't they doing some interesting things with mobile phones around that time?
Yeah, absolutely. While the IBM Simon was like, struggling to find its footing.
Right.
Over in Japan, you had NTT Docomo, and they were busy pioneering a different kind of mobile ecosystem with their iMode platform.
Okay.
And it was revolutionary for its time.
iMode. Okay. What was the big deal with that?
It was like, think like mobile internet,
Okay.
but way, way ahead of its time. I mean, we're talking like downloading ringtones, playing games. You could even read comics on these little flip phones.
Wow. So they were like early adopters of what we consider like basic smartphone features now.
Yeah.
What led to them being ahead of the curve like that?
I think it was a combination of factors. For one, Japan had a much more developed mobile infrastructure compared to a lot of other parts of the world at that time.
Right.
And then, Japanese consumers were and still are really very receptive to new technologies.
So they were like primed and ready for that whole mobile revolution.
Totally.
But even with all that innovation, we were still stuck with those like T9 keyboards, right?
Yeah.
Pecking out messages, one painstaking letter at a time.
Yeah, the memories. Texting was practically an Olympic sport back then.
And then trying to like navigate those early smartphone interfaces.
Oh, tell me about it.
Not exactly known for their user friendliness.
Not at all.
So when did things start to shift more towards like the smartphone landscape we'd recognize today? Was it the early 2000s?
Yeah, I'd say so. That's when you start to see the rise of some names you definitely recognize. BlackBerry with its like iconic physical keyboard and the early Windows mobile devices,
Right.
Both very much geared towards like the business world.
It was all about like email, calendar, contacts, like your
Yeah.
mobile office in your pocket.
Yep.
Not exactly the most like exciting devices for the average consumer.
No, not at all. I mean, they were like the interfaces were still, pretty clunky.
Yeah.
And the focus was very much on productivity, not like entertainment or any of that.
Right.
But, that's not to say that there weren't attempts to make smartphones more consumer friendly.
Right. Which brings us to, I'm guessing, like the rise of the touchscreen.
Exactly.
Because it's hard to imagine a smartphone now without one.
It's true.
So like when did that transition happen?
Well, the LG Prada, which was released in 2006, I think deserves a special mention here.
Okay.
It was the first phone with a large capacitive touchscreen.
Okay, so for those of us who don't speak tech,
Sure.
what does capacitive touchscreen even mean? Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, so essentially a capacitive touchscreen responds to the electrical conductivity of your finger, right?
Right.
So unlike those old resistive touchscreens, which you had to like press down on,
Right.
this allowed for like multi-touch gestures like pinching to zoom, which we just, take for granted now. But back then it was revolutionary.
It's like, what made those early touch screens so much more intuitive?
Exactly.
Okay.
Much more responsive.
So LG kind of paves the way with that.
They did.
And then, just a year later, 2007, the iPhone happens.
Right.
And I think it's safe to say that changed everything.
It did.
But why? Why was the iPhone such a game changer?
I think it was just like a perfect storm of design, technology, and honestly, marketing genius.
Okay.
I mean, the iPhone was sleek, the touch screen was incredibly intuitive,
Right.
and it introduced the world to a little something called the App Store.
The App Store, talk about a revolution.
I know, right?
Because suddenly it's not just about the phone itself, it's like the limitless possibilities of what you can do with it.
It's true, but it wasn't just the App Store that made the iPhone a success.
Right.
It was the overall user experience, like the sleek design, the intuitive interface, just the way it felt in your hand, Apple really nailed it.
Right.
And other manufacturers, they took notice.
Oh, yeah. And with that, the touchscreen smartphone era had officially begun.
For sure.
But it wasn't all like smooth sailing for Apple, was it? Because didn't Google enter the scene around this time too?
They did. In 2008, just a year after the iPhone's debut, Google released Android. And, that changed the smartphone landscape forever. But we'll get into that more after a quick break.
Sounds good. We'll be right back to dive deeper into the rise of Android and how it shaped the smartphone wars right after this. So we left off with Apple, like really shaking things up with the iPhone, but then Google comes along with Android.
You're right.
And it's like, game on.
Yeah.
So what was it about Android that made it such a big deal? How did it go from like the new kid on the block to basically running on like most of the smartphones out there?
Well, I think the key thing with Android was that it was open source.
Right.
So unlike iOS, which is, Apple's baby and they keep it under lock and key, Android was like, here you go, world, take it, make it your own. And that meant that like other companies could take the Android operating system, they could adapt it for their own devices, and it led to this like explosion of Android phones from companies like Samsung, HTC, Huawei, you name it.
So instead of just like one company controlling the whole ecosystem, like, we were talking about with Apple and its whole like walled garden thing.
Exactly.
Android's like, nope, open market. Everyone's invited.
Exactly. And that meant more affordable smartphones, right? You had different phone designs, different features.
Right.
And it gave consumers so much more choice.
So it's not just for like, the tech enthusiasts or the business people anymore. It's like smartphones for everyone.
Exactly.
Which I guess explains like Android's dominance now, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
You mentioned a few companies that like jumped on that Android bandwagon, but weren't there others trying to compete back then?
Oh, totally. Yeah. It was like a real battle royale in those early days. Yeah. You had Palm with their WebOS trying to like carve out a niche with this like unique card-based interface.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And then there was Microsoft, right, giving it another go with Windows Phone.
Right.
They even managed to like snag Nokia for a while there, hoping to recapture some of that early 2000s magic.
But none of them could quite like topple the Apple Google like duopoly that was emerging.
Right.
What do you think were some of the key factors that led to their downfall and like the landscape that we see now?
It's a tough one because it's always a mix of things, but like in Palm's case, they had innovative ideas.
Okay.
But they really struggled to attract developers.
Oh, right, to build apps.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's crucial.
And they just couldn't keep up with the sheer volume and variety of apps that you had in the Apple and Google app stores.
Because, the apps are kind of what make the phone, right?
Yeah.
It's like having a million tools and toys all just right there at your fingertips.
Totally.
But what about Microsoft? They had like the resources, obviously.
They could.
What do you think happened there?
I think it was partly timing.
Okay.
And partly, honestly, just execution.
Okay.
They were kind of late to the touchscreen game.
Right.
And, they tried their best, but Windows Phone, it wasn't quite as intuitive or user-friendly as iOS or Android,
Yeah.
And they had some good ideas, but it always felt like they were playing catch-up.
It's that classic, like, survival of the fittest thing, in the tech world.
It is.
But even with all that, like, the rise and fall of all these different players,
Right.
there was this constant drive for innovation.
Yeah.
And one area where that's like super evident is in camera technology.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, remember when phone cameras were barely good enough for like a blurry selfie?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, and now look at them.
It's insane.
From like those grainy low-res photos to now, people are shooting like almost professional quality photos and videos on their phones.
It's amazing how far it's come.
It really is.
But it's not even just about the camera itself, is it?
No.
It's also about how those photos and videos actually look on the phones themselves.
Right.
And that kind of leads us to, I'm guessing, like the ever-growing demand for bigger and better screens.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Remember when a small screen was like a badge of honor?
Right. Like, oh, look how pocketable my phone is.
Exactly.
But those days are long gone.
Gone. Now it's all about like, how much screen real estate can you cram into this thing?
Right, because we're watching movies on them, we're playing games,
Exactly.
scrolling through social media. Like, you want that big, beautiful display.
Totally. And that desire for like a more immersive experience, it's led to some pretty significant design changes, The bezels are disappearing.
Right.
You've got edge-to-edge displays.
And of course, we can't talk about smartphone design without mentioning, like, the great headphone jack debate.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Some people loved it, some people hated it, but it definitely, like, made a splash.
Oh, it did. Yeah, for sure.
I think it just goes to show how, like, tech is always evolving. Companies are always trying to, like, innovate.
Yeah.
Even if it means, like, ruffling a few feathers along the way.
Right.
Speaking of innovation, we got to talk about battery life.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, what good's a phone with all the latest and greatest features if the battery's dead by, like, lunchtime?
Totally. And I mean, early smartphones, they were notorious for their terrible battery life.
Oh, I remember.
But over the years, we've seen huge advancements, right? We've got more efficient processors, we've got better power management software.
Right, but it still feels like we're, like, constantly tethered to our chargers.
It's true. And I think it's because as much as the battery tech has gotten better,
Right.
our usage has also gone way up.
We're demanding more.
We are. Power-hungry apps, streaming,
Yeah.
constant connectivity. It's a lot.
It's like a vicious cycle, right?
It is.
Like bigger screens, faster processors, that all takes more power.
Yeah.
So then you need bigger batteries, which makes the phones bulkier. And it's just this constant, like, balancing act.
It really is.
But, beyond all the, like, hardware specs and the design trends and all that,
Yeah.
the thing that I find so fascinating about smartphones is how they've become, like, this extension of ourselves.
Right.
This tool that we rely on for so much more than just making calls.
It's true. I mean, think about it. Our smartphones, our cameras, our GPS, our entertainment systems, our wallets, fitness trackers, our news sources.
It's everything.
It's everything. They've replaced like a whole drawer full of gadgets and become such an integral part of like just our daily routines.
It's kind of amazing, but also, like, a little bit scary how much we rely on these things now,
It's true. And that actually brings us to, I think, a really crucial aspect of this whole smartphone revolution, its impact on society.
Right, because it's not all, like, sunshine and roses, is it?
Exactly. There's definitely a flip side to all this.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
All right.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, there's, like, this weird tension there
There.
between, like, the amazing things that smartphones let us do and then, like, the potential downsides.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's dive into that a bit.
Okay, well, I mean, on the one hand, you can't deny that smartphones have like democratized information in a way that we've never seen before, right?
Right.
We have like literally a world of knowledge, entertainment, connection,
Right.
all like right there at our fingertips.
Right.
And that's been huge for, empowering individuals, for fueling movements, for changing the way we communicate globally. I mean,
It's like having a library, a TV, a map, like a town square, all just like rolled into one
exactly.
pocket-sized device. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is.
But you said like double-edged sword earlier, so
Right.
what's the other side of that?
Well, I mean, there's the potential for addiction, right?
Okay.
You've got the constant notifications, you've got the FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Oh yeah.
You've got the endless scroll of social media.
It's like designed to be addictive almost.
It is. It's very easy to get sucked in, and I think for some people it can lead to, increased anxiety, even depression.
Right.
We've become so used to being constantly connected that it's like we've forgotten how to disconnect.
Right. Like we were saying earlier, sometimes you got to unplug to like actually connect with,
People,
around you
yeah.
or even just yourself.
Be present in the moment.
Right, exactly.
And then there's, the whole issue of privacy, right? I mean, every time we, tap our phone, swipe, search,
Right.
we're creating these like mountains of data.
That's a lot, yeah.
It is. And, it's a little unnerving to think about, like, who has access to that data and how it's being used,
It's that classic thing of like, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Exactly.
And in this case, the product is like our attention, our data,
all of it.
all of it. Yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off.
It is, for sure.
So we've got like all this power, all this potential for good, but then also these very real concerns about like how smartphones are shaping us, how they're shaping our society.
Right.
It feels like we're kind of at a crossroads.
I think so. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about like individual choices anymore, right?
Right.
Governments are involved, policymakers, tech companies.
You've all got a role to play.
They do. We need to have like serious conversations about data privacy, about digital well-being, about the role of AI in all of this.
And how to like make sure it's all being used for good, or at least like not for,
Exactly.
It's all about finding that balance.
Right, finding that balance. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up, I think, for today.
I think so.
It's been, fascinating as always.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic for sure.
So, thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of smartphones.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And thanks to all of you out there for listening in. And we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.